Hello, my name's host Eric, and I'm the host of Talking with Famous People. And if you've never watched Talking with Famous People before, then you probably don't know that I like to talk about metaphysics. And today I'm going to explain quantum mechanics. And I introed with this notion about me liking metaphysics because I want to break apart, first of all, the idea that quantum mechanics is a science thing. Quantum mechanics is not a science thing. Quantum mechanics is something that was determined by philosophers first. And the same mechanics that apply in the physical world towards small particles apply on all levels, from the atomic level to the stellar level to the universal level. They apply to all kinds of time objects as well as to space objects. And the difference between a time object and a space object is simply that a time object, something like this YouTube video, it requires energy to persist, whereas a space object requires energy to change. So this issue of uncertainty and quantum mechanics is derived expressly and unavoidably from the nature of the observer. Now, when I say that philosophy figured this out first, let's look at the old philosophical question: if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? This is how it is that philosophy came to this conclusion first. It's because, see, when we go to approach reality, which is to say, when we move through the world, we render those realities that we experience as we experience in them. We have to render them into objects, things that don't constantly change, in order to process them. In the real world, everything is a process, in the sense that it's not truly static, even if it appears to be so. However, in order to understand something, we have to process it, name it, pin it down, give it distinct boundaries and identity, and position it against other such objects within a model. Now, back to the tree in the forest. If I say to you, imagine a tree falling in the forest, but there's nobody there to make a sound, what I am doing is presenting you with contradictory premises. Because what I'm really saying in the first part is, imagine you observe a tree falling in the forest which goes unobserved. It's not possible to observe that which goes unobserved. So while all evidence that we think we experience points to continuity of objects and systems, whether we're there or not, that question is necessarily undetermined until we look. It's not possible to know for sure that the system proceeds as predicted in our absence. And that's why there's quantum uncertainty. Another way to think about it is the future is in a state of readiness but unmanifested until it happens. And so that's what they mean by talking about a quantum superposition. Something's in a state of readiness to become real, but it hasn't happened yet. The only circumstances in which this occurs are circumstances in which we anticipate that a given event will occur, but nobody's checked yet. It's pretty rare. Now, what's the impact of this on your life and everything? Well, foremost, to feel the weight of it, you've got to understand the role of the law of non-contradiction and how it applies. I mean, there are three distinct states of being and multiple realities in which we experience those states. So the first state of being is data stream focus. That's the now. You're focused on the data that's coming in on the data stream and how it's being rendered in the moment, looking for newly occurring events that prompt direct action. If you are engaged in the second state of reality, then you are focused on data that's already come in. You're focused on the time objects in your head, not on the space objects in the world. And you're mostly walking around with your quote-unquote head in the clouds. If you are engaged in the creative process, the third state, then the law of non-contradiction doesn't apply there, and it doesn't apply in the second state either. It only applies in the first state because of all the many various realities that we have, the space reality cannot manifest as anything other than it is. In other words, conditionality doesn't exist in the dimension of physical objects. Instead, we have causality. Causality breaks down in the dimension of time objects, just as time objects disappear unless we make them persist in the dimension of space objects. When I say there's no conditionality in the physical world, I mean we don't have an undo. Time is the trump. It beats everything else. We can't go back and say, I don't like that outcome, so obviously let's try a different antecedent and see if we get a different outcome, as you can in a world of conditionality, a world of time objects. Space objects, you can't do that. That's why we perceive there to be something called causality. However, when we analyze causality at great depth, then it is functioning purely in the land of time objects, and it doesn't hold up at all. So it's important for us to distinguish the fact that different realities are going to work according to different rules. And the law of non-contradiction is only relevant in some of them. The law of non-contradiction is certainly relevant in the physical world. No two objects can occupy the same space in time and context. It's certainly relevant in the deductive reasoning world. If you have contradictory premises, then your model is invalid. However, much of the reality generating we do is not subject to that, and realities themselves are not subject to that. In other words, two contradictory realities can coexist. You can alternate between the two. You can't exist in both of them at the same time, however. You could argue that both those realities exist within you independent of time, but they are not independent of the delivery of new objects into that mental ecosystem. So each new object comes into that mental ecosystem, it will link and parse according to your nature, more or less. If you are by nature a linker, as I am, and a parser, as I am, then when these new objects land in your mental space, they get evaluated in terms of the existing models, the existing ongoing reality build, or I guess you would say the mental objects that represent that ongoing reality build, and provide you a reality in all dimensions. You and I, every human being, you are the culmination, you are the totality of all of your life experiences. You are as much what happened to you when you were 1 year old as you are what happens to you right now. Every event that gets processed and gets rendered becomes some sort of an object that lands in your mental space and then informs the other objects and defines what that space is. It's a self-defining ecosystem and a self-adapting ecosystem. So the ecosystem itself adapts as new species come into the ecosystem and require it to behave differently in order to accommodate them all. Functionally, if you are existing in any of these multiple realities, you're going to find that at some point your realities contradict with each other. Most of us have spent most of our time, including me for sure, trying to reconcile those contradictions, saying this reality contradicts with this other reality. One of them must be right. But that's not true. As a matter of fact, that exclusionary stuff, if you are saying, look, this is right and that is wrong, it has to be within the same reality or else it doesn't count. Now, when I'm telling people stuff about politics, about liberty and stuff, that absolutely counts. I'm right and they're wrong, and there's no other way to put it. And I will prove it, because those sort of things are subject to correct and incorrect, because they involve a moral calculus. However, that doesn't mean that if I were to say, oh, we should prioritize liberty, and the other person is saying, no, we should prioritize using crystals in our homes and becoming one with the universe, we are not talking about contradictory realities at all. Those things aren't exclusive. And even if they were, which, I mean, they are exclusive because prioritizing one over the other means you're not doing the other one. It's more like, if we were to operate under this framework, we should do this. If we were operating under this framework, we should do this. In that regard. And then you have a job to compare the two realities and say which one is a preferable choice in this context. And when you're talking about reality preference, there is good cause to think that we can establish that we can establish a primacy of realities based on what it's doing. So your model of crystals is not the predominant reality. If we are talking about politics, you shouldn't be. If you are trying to frame politics through that reality, you're going to find an extremely low range of linkability. You may link it fine in your head to everything, but nobody else is going to be able to link it, because we know what a lot of the default operating protocols of consciousness are, because we all hold them. We know what the default norms are. Like, it's not okay to advocate in favor of slavery. It's not okay to kill people. If your reality says it is okay to kill people, and you're going around killing people, then you're going to find yourself butting up against realities in strikingly inconsistent ways, and those realities will fight back at a certain point. The only way you can continue to persist in antisocial realities, which is to say realities that don't respect the equality of the realities of others, or the sacrosanct nature of those realities, and how they cannot be coerced into changing them, because they are them. If your dominant realities are comfortable with coercion, they don't withstand any scrutiny. You can't win any arguments on it. And the only way your culture can persist in those is if you successfully managed wildly successful indoctrination of an entire population. Keep in mind, nobody's doing it. The population is doing it to itself. This is an example of what happens when you get a reality in place that attains the status of dominance before information fluidity prevents that from occurring. So nowadays, that could never occur if we were starting from scratch, so to speak. We couldn't possibly be starting from scratch. So no subculture is going to start now. Like, no group of Americans is going to go off and they're going to come up with a new ideology, and it's going to be just like Islam in terms of its awfulness, but new. Nobody's going to come up with that. To the extent that they do, it's not going to attract very many adherents. You're certainly not going to start a new religion now and get, hundreds of millions of people adhering to it fanatically when its central tenets are antisocial to the multiverse. So, quantum uncertainty. Back to the topic at the top of this video. What we do all the time is we talk about predictions as though they were foregone conclusions. And we forget that until we observe, reality does not manifest. And if we want to manifest really good realities, and more importantly, if we want to dance between them effectively, take advantage of all of the possible benefits while leaving behind any possible harms, if we want to do that, then we need to start embracing this notion of a fractal multiverse, in which human realities are no less real than the realities of outer space or of the science lab. We can start in part by not affording science the primacy that we've afforded it so far. Yes, it is true, the scientific method is sound. It is a skeptical method, and skepticism is always good. But it also relies on the fact that the law of non-contradiction always applies. But it doesn't, as we discussed already. And when we start talking to scientists who are dismissing certain things as not scientific enough, we realize that, first of all, science is already down. Science is almost exclusively parsing inward now, finding ever more narrow distinctions between things, ever more narrow explanations for why the mechanism works this way in this context, that way in this context, yada, yada, yada. And no matter how much better that methodology is at accurately predicting physical world phenomena, it doesn't do us any good if you're making such minuscule distinctions between things that there's not really any knowledge gained, or useful knowledge gained. Beyond that, the physics of the world breaks down well before the quantum level. I mean, that's what the scientists say. Well, Newtonian physics breaks down at the quantum level. Newtonian physics broke down as soon as humans considered the paradox is implicit in it, and dreamed up some alternatives. That's how realities work. We render them as we live them, and they inform our own realities. We render our new realities into time objects, send them out in the world, where they inform the realities of others. That's how we have so many shared reality pieces, and yet see so vastly differently the same thing. Quantum uncertainty works not only on a level of observation, it works on a level of observation in terms of placement in realities. When I send a time object out in the world, how it informs your realities is not contingent so much on the time object as it is on what comprises your existing realities and how you manage the existing contradictions, and if and whether you're actively engaged in metacognition. I plan to either figure it out or get so far into the ineffable that I go insane. I want an answer. I want answers. I want satisfying answers. I want a meta framework that says these answers are satisfied in this model and not this model, and here's the mechanism by which we determine satisfactory linkability between models, yada, yada, yada. So think about quantum mechanics, think about uncertainty principle, and know this. When I turn out this video, I'm probably still here in this chair. But it won't ever be the case, or not the case, in reality, for you. Because you'll never see it. It'll remain forever in a state of quantum superposition until and unless I tell you if I was still sitting in the chair 1 minute after pushing the stop thing. Am I still sitting in the chair 1 minute after I stop this video? You might believe that the answer is definitive. But in fact, whatever I think about it, the answer is, in reality, uncertain, maintained in a state of quantum superposition until you observe it. But, Eric, isn't your observation make it real? It only manifests in my realities. And the notion that we share reality, it just doesn't hold water. We have to be rendering our realities concurrently. And they have to be distinct. I don't think it makes any sense.